In the last cycle, we took 3 discoveries to $500 million market capitalisation from first principles, and really you can say this is our next one in the waiting in terms of the next discovery.
Welcome to Proven and Probable, where we deliver mining insights and bullion sales in the form of physical delivery, offshore depositories, and private blockchain distributed ledger technology.
Welcome to Proven and Probable. I'm your host, Maurice Jackson. Today we will introduce an early-stage exploration company focused on identifying district-scale high-grade copper and silver systems in Peru. Joining us for a conversation is Michael Hudson, the CEO of Hannan Metals. Mr. Hudson, welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, Maurice. It's a pleasure to join you for the first time.
Well, glad to have you on the program, sir, to share the value proposition before us in Hannan Metals. Sir, before we delve into company specifics, Mr. Hudson, please acquaint us with Hannan Metals and share the opportunity the company presents to the market.
Hannan is a company that I started with my business partners 3 or 4 years ago. We had a few years looking in Ireland for zinc when zinc had its little moment in the market. We saw where zinc was going. We had a long history in base metals and knew that it was probably a good idea to expand into other commodities. And as a consequence, about a year and a half ago, we identified an opportunity that we're going to talk about in much more great detail, a copper opportunity in Peru. And this was a unique situation. We've got a long history of experience in Peru as a team. And away we go, and really we've just started exploring it in earnest over the last 3 or 4 months, raised some capital, and it looks a very exciting district scale, a new copper basin, if you like, and the style is a sediment-hosted copper system, which is very similar to some of the largest copper systems on Earth in the Central African Copper Belt or the Kupferschiefer of Poland. So a very interesting thesis that is playing out now.
Well, let's go to Peru and visit the San Martin. Where and how did Hannan Metals attain the data that led to the acquisition of the San Martin?
Well, as I mentioned, we've got a very long history in Peru. I was living and working there from the mid-90s. And actually, I mentioned zinc before because I was working with the largest zinc company of its day back in the 90s, exploring through Peru. And that company was called Pasminco, and it actually went into receivership in the late 90s, early 2000s. So myself and my business partner, who at the time and who still is, so we've had a long history together, bought the exploration data from the receivers. And we packaged that data up. We sold it in its rawest form to most of the major mining companies of the world because it was the best publicly available data set for exploration. And all we are in exploration are data gatherers and de-riskers of projects. And so this was a great base for many. But also, when you add some brain power on top of that data, you start deriving projects. And I suppose one that stuck is the Tinka Iawilca project that we vended a long time ago to that company, and we have a royalty on that project. So we've got this long data history in Peru and understanding of the country and contacts as well. It's a people business like any business, really. So we knew that there was some copper out in this San Martin area, which is in the northeastern part of Peru. And we went out there and basically checked and followed up on some of this early stage data, and that's where we are today.
Well, let's talk about a clever way that Hannan Metals has de-risked their project here. Hannan has shifted the paradigm on exploration by implementing a concept known as new search spaces. And the intellectual capital derived on this concept has positioned Hannan Metals in a first-mover competitive advantage among your peers. Sir, please introduce the concept of new search spaces, and how does it fit into the narrative of defining the San Martin as a greenfields or a brownfields exploration play?
Well, firstly, I didn't coin the phrase. It comes from a very smart geologist called John Wronski, who operates, he's an Australian, but operates around the world. And really, this is a concept that's been taken a little further than just talking about grassroots exploration or greenfields. It's basically identifying an area of prospectivity of whatever you may be looking for, and it may be in a old or a very mature terrain where there's lots of data, but you come up with a new thesis, and then you search for that new thesis, whether it's going underground for high grade systems underneath old oxide gold, for example, or you go into new areas completely and say, well, this San Martin area has the same geological characteristics for many, many reasons as some of those super deposits that form in Africa or in Poland and northern Germany, and then you collect the data that opens up that search space, I suppose. So it really is the true way to make discovery. It's very hard to go back to old ideas in old camps and do the same again. And really those easy pickings have been made in our business. So you really have to think a little broadly from the initial start of your exploration. So it's looking into new areas with new theses or ideas or concepts, and then collecting the data to support or refute those. And that's the exploration or scientific process, but it really means that you're thinking about it much earlier on from a perspective of trying to find something large and new.
Mr. Hudson, to truly appreciate the value proposition of the San Martin, please provide us with a mental picture and tell us about the stratigraphy and the genetic model.
Okay, so that is how the magic happens, I suppose, and we have been very fortunate here in that this has literally had very, very little exploration. There have been a couple of explorers in the past in this area, but we're talking 1 year here and 1 year there. But really the area and the understanding hasn't been put together until the last 6 to 12 months. And we've benefited from the data that has now been made freely available to the hard rock mining industry from the petroleum business. And the petroleum explorers were working in these areas a long time ago, way before we ever thought there could be any prospectivity here for metals. And that's important because the petroleum explorers have bought hundreds of millions of dollars worth of exploration data, collected in a different way for a different commodity, of course, looking for oil, but we can use that data and apply it to the things that matter for copper. So the things that matter for copper here and the sediment-hosted copper systems, and I should say there's quite a large amount of silver with this system, so it's really a copper-silver system. The things that matter here for these systems are, like any deposit, source, transport, and trap. And they're fairly well defined. It's a relatively simple model in its gross scales. So we always look for a source and their source rocks and the seismic data that the oilies have produced over these areas give us a great understanding of the rocks or the stratigraphy or the layers of rocks and how they've formed through that period of time. So we can identify source rocks, we can identify transport, which is really important also. So the seismic shows us those big structures, those big faults that have operated from very early stages in this geological basin right through to when the Andes was forming, and they went from what we say extension to compression when the Andes was forming. And all these different stages we can identify through the rock record and determine not only what is important, but when, and then we can target those structures that have been moving at that appropriate time. And then the trap is probably the most important part, so source, transport, and trap. And the trap is, once again, where those structures intersect the right rocks. And in this case, it's a chemical reaction that drops the metal out, and we call it a redox boundary, a reduced oxidized boundary. So the fluids are oxidized, and when they see the first reduced rocks in the sequence, they could be anything from black shales or graphite to what we have here, organic material, then the copper drops out. And the key point now is that these systems form over a vast scale. We have an area here that is under tenure for 120 kilometres of length. My apologies for using the metric system, but it's something like 60 or 70 miles, right? And it's a very, very large system that is working, that source, transport and trap. We're finding copper in those trap horizons over this extensive zone. And it's not just one trap horizon we see multiple traps, multiple redox boundaries forming in that stratigraphic pile of rocks. So that data-rich environment that we have has really helped us fast track to not only to understand but to target this system over such a large area.
Now, we have before us a 3D model. What are we looking at here?
Well, this is quite an unusual circumstance in that an area that's really only been explored for less than a year, we're able to build up a comprehensive 3D model. And this is a model in a program called Leapfrog. It's something like 300 kilometres long by 180 kilometres wide. And there we can see the planes or the sections, like cutting a loaf of bread along the long axis. They're interpretations from the seismic sections that the oil companies have provided. And then we've been able to tie all those together literally in this program. And we can start to understand all those features that I just talked about, the source, transport and trap features that really allow us to understand how this copper basin formed, how the copper formed, and that gives us the style. And once again, I said that this style wasn't really understood until all this data was pulled together. And then it allows us to hone in specific areas, not only stake those areas, which we've done very aggressively. We've had a first mover advantage here because we were first, and it's led to a staking rush all around us, I should say. But we had that benefit of all that data and the ability to stake what we wanted first. And then within those mining concession areas that we've staked, and many of them have now been granted, we're able to narrow down the areas which we want to explore.
Can you walk us through the exploration model?
Well, I think, I just really went through that in the source, transport and trap, but I think you've probably got on screen now a very good summarised cross-section that Lars Dahlenborg, who's our president and the guy running the day-to-day of the business, and it's really his brains that have pulled this together, this whole model. And what he's summarising there is the source, which is those purple rocks, and the fluids taking the copper. The other key point here that I didn't mention before is that the magic here is the scavenging the fluids and bringing them up into those source rocks is driven by salt, of all things. So there's vast salt deposits that formed in these areas, and salt forms an amazing scavenger of metals. These highly brine-rich fluids act with superpowers, basically, to take the copper out of those purple rocks at the bottom. Then those fluids move up through those faults, so there's the transport, where you can see the dotted lines, and then into those areas where you can see at the top there, we've got little red line. That's one area we call the Saraquillo Formation, and that's one area where this redox boundary or the trap forms. And then even up higher where there's the green rocks with the blue, they're areas where we're finding gossans of lead and zinc, which are peripheral to the copper, and also copper in those areas. Now, gossans that are 50 to 80 metres wide at surface over multiple kilometres. So this is a big and vast system. I mean, we're talking about 5 or 6 kilometre view through the Earth's crust there. So that's a very the scale of that is very big, but that's the magic.
Now, do you have any cross-section images to share with us?
Well, there's many that we've provided on our website and in our corporate presentation, but they're certainly there, and you can start to see, I suppose, in perhaps you've got it up on the screen now for your listeners. You can see that these areas where they form in those blue rocks, at the top of those blue rocks, the Sarakio Formation, or up into the green rocks, the Kupferschiefer Formation, where we're getting those thick gossans, they not only form along this 120 kilometres or 60 to 70 mile trend, but they form very wide zones going 6 to 10 kilometres wide across in an east-west viewpoint. So you can see that there's some very high grades that are developing. It's early days. We've only found limited outcrops. This is quite a challenging area to explore, and probably one of the reasons it was still sitting there is that it's high jungle. So the infrastructure we'll talk about soon is not too bad, but it still doesn't leave lots of outcrops there. So we found a dozen outcrops over the larger area, but most of the mineralisation we found today is walking up creeks and picking up boulders that are shedding from the hills above us. So there's a lot more work to do, but there's a hell of a lot of copper developing over this large area.
You alluded to some comparisons earlier, but a picture's worth 1,000 words. And when I think of the San Martin, the first thing that comes to my mind is scale, and I'm talking about district scale. To put some things into perspective, can you provide us with some comparisons?
Yeah, the important things that you've just mentioned there are scale and grade, and if you can find that, that's a nirvana of our business, of course, and we have both those in abundance. And the picture that you see here is the Central African Copper Belt. It's not where we're exploring, of course, but what it shows is the scale of that system. The sediment-hosted copper deposits on Earth are the second most prolific form of copper, where we derive our copper from, the first being porphyries these days. The porphyries are coming to an end, in my prediction. Those higher grade porphyries have been mined. There's many more of them that are lower grade, but as the world is changing and those big open pits with lower and lower grades become less desirable, these higher grade systems that have a smaller footprint will be more desirable, and that's what happens here in the copper belt in many respects. These systems are big and high grade, and you can see the scale of the basin that we're exploring is called the Wayaga Basin, and that's overlain there in that yellow colour. And you can see we're about a third the size of the copper belt just in the basin that we're exploring in. Excuse me. And that is really only a small part of this foreland basin system that extends on the eastern side of the Andes. And really this is a new copper belt that not only exists where we're exploring, but it extends from Colombia through Ecuador, where we have some peer companies exploring for the same systems. They're about 300 kilometres north of us, and then down through Peru into Argentina and Chile. So this is a big new copper belt. We have some of the more advanced and more easily accessible areas, and that's why we targeted where we wanted to. But this has some big implications for Peru too, right? This is a new copper belt for Peru potentially developing here. They already produce on a country basis the second most amount of copper in the world, and this could shift them to number one if this thesis continues to hold.
We're going to cover your technical team later, but they've been quite successful in their results on the implementation of the new search spaces. And that's not just on scale, but equally impressive on identifying high grade. What are some key results that have current shareholders excited?
Well, we have some very high grades, and they've actually surprised us too, to be completely frank, Maurice. This system is developing some very high grades from the initial boulders and hundreds of them that we found over this very vast area in creeks, and then we've started to find some of these outcrops. So we're seeing sort of 3 to 5 metre thick zones in the Sarakio Formation, running 2 to 5% copper, something like that. And that obviously is our next challenge, is to find continuity of these high grades, and And that's what we're working to do, of course. But as I've said, it's relatively early stage. This is our first intense year of exploration. That's had a little hiatus, of course, now with everything that's going on in the world with COVID-19. But we've still had quite a good start before we were shut down a few weeks ago. So there'll be many more of these high grades found. Also, we're finding not only that Sarakio, that 2 to 5% copper over those widths, over large areas. We're seeing that these outcrops 20 kilometres apart, but we're finding very thick lead zinc gossans that we think are peripheral to the copper bearing parts of the system. And these gossans are 50 to 80 metres wide and running percent levels, up to 10% zinc. The main target here is copper, but you never know what you just may find here, and we may find both not only a copper system but a lead zinc system as it's turning out here. So we've been very successful so far because of that data-rich environment that I talked about before that has allowed us to target these areas. And just maybe, there's a hell of a lot more here to be found, of course, and so the early results will reflect where this project's going.
Let's discuss some important topics germane to the project, beginning with reversionary interests. Are there any on your projects?
Absolutely. Everything is 100% owned. We've staked these claims from first principles. So we've gone through an application stage with many of these areas now being granted. So we've got something like 521 square kilometres. This is a huge area. Like I've said, something like 120 kilometres long and approximately 6 to 10 kilometres wide. There's a number of different prospect areas and project areas, and it's pretty hard to get your head around if you think of, or the listeners think of where they're sitting and think of 60 to 70 miles away as the crow flies. That's the area we're exploring. So we've got about 40%, I'd say, something like that, of the mining concessions granted, and what that allows us to do is to explore these areas, not to mine them, of course. This is very early stage exploration, but it allows us to explore those areas, deal with the local stakeholders and engage with them and do what we're doing. And ideally, of course, the next stage will come soon enough, and that's when we've got enough geological data and enough support on the ground from local stakeholders to move to drilling some of these areas with diamond drilling, which is really the drilling holes the size of your fist into the ground for a few hundred metres to test what's happening at depth, because everything we're seeing, of course, is at surface today.
Can you elaborate on the infrastructure and the logistics surrounding the San Martin?
Yeah, it sounds like deepest, darkest Lima when we talk about the jungles of Peru, and what we are in is in a relatively new area from an exploration point of view, but it's a very well developed area. It's seen huge migration from the Andes down into these high jungle areas. And when I say high jungle, I'm talking about 600 to 1,200 meters of elevation. So it's not the Amazon basin where it's flat. It's got lots of topography, but it is jungle areas, lots of rain, lots of vegetation. We fly into an airport or town called Tarapoto. That has a dozen flights daily from Lima, that's less than an hour flight away, and then from Tarapoto, literally we're driving on bitumen roads, and we're no more than 2 hours from the very north to the south of our project, over that 60 or 70 mile length. So we have some very good infrastructure. That's changed dramatically over the last 10 years or 15 years. That infrastructure just did not exist. There's new roads to Lima that still take a while to drive because you've got to go up and over the Andes, but they save the local people 7 or 8 hours of driving with these new roads that have been put in, going even back to the capital. So that's one of the big changes also, and nobody's explored this area in any detail before, but it would have been a lot tougher in only 10 years ago, and then we're walking into some of these areas, but doing lots of walking actually, but it's really shortcut by many dirt roads that cross into these areas, and that's where we found all our outcropping areas, for example, at the moment. By just walking the roads and doing the simple stuff, we haven't really been cutting our way through the jungle with much intensity to date, but that's the next stage following up from what we see in these more easily accessible areas, and walking up the hills and with machetes and going and finding lots more areas that will be hidden by that jungle, and that's the exciting part.
What are Hannan Metals' principal objectives for the next 12 months?
They're pretty well stated, I think, Maurice. We raised some capital earlier on in the year. We started with a team of 4 geologists on the ground, exploring the area, for the first time, like I said, with any intensity. Last year we had 1 geological team. Now we've got 4 teams. So we're collecting so much more data. We need to demonstrate scale, tick, we've done that. We need to demonstrate grade, tick, we've done that. We've demonstrated the style of this mineralisation. But the next challenges are to demonstrate the continuity of those grades over various scales. So that will come via drilling, but that won't happen until we learn enough about the rocks at surface. So we don't want to go and permit areas for drilling and not be in the best areas, if you like. So that's what we're still working on. But certainly over the next 12 months, it's to demonstrate continuity of scale by drilling. The other key point in that is our main objective is to work with the locals to tell them what we want to do to gain their acceptance, and then come back and show them what we've done and show that we've been operating with responsibility. And because these areas haven't been explored before, there's a general lack of understanding about what exploration is. So there's a lot of education here to be done to explain that we're prospectors and obviously looking for areas that could potentially be mines one day, but it's a very high risk business, of course, and we just don't know where those better areas are going to be. So it's very much a first principle working with the local people as well. So that's a key objective as well, because if you get off on the wrong foot anywhere in the world, from the very early stages, it's very hard to recover. So starting well is a key objective as well for us in that respect.
We've discussed the good. Let's address the bad. What can go wrong, and what is your action plan to mitigate that wrong?
Yeah, lots of things can go wrong in exploration. You don't find what you think is there, and then that's second-guessing nature without a doubt. And as I hinted at before, really we are de-riskers of nature, and the only similarity of our business is the R&D business in the pharmaceutical business, where we spend lots of capital and there's very few projects that progress and advance forward towards mining, and that's sort of like the wonder drugs that eventually permitted and become very successful drugs after lots of R&D in the pharmaceutical business. So that's what we're doing. So there's of course inherently a lot of risk. So how is that mitigated? That's mitigated by having the right managers of the scarce capital that we're able to access in the capital markets, and exploring appropriately, not spending another dollar if we're proving something isn't there rather than it is there. And it all comes down to the opportunity itself and whether the system develops. And so far, so good. We can certainly see that there's well and truly a great prize here to be gained, but we'll spend the capital appropriately to mitigate those risks. The other area, I suppose, and I touched on that also, is permitting. We want to make sure we get that right. So it's no good if we find the world's biggest deposit of copper and we're never able to access it, of course, with getting the local stakeholders offside. So we have to make sure that those two go hand in hand, and really it's working with credibility and respect and good communication, and like any relationship in life, if you have those values, then ideally things can progress for you. But that's our culture of the company and how we aim to succeed.
Those are some good ethos to subscribe to. Switching gears, we've covered the project. Let's discuss the people responsible for increasing shareholder value with their business acumen, and discuss the commercial and technical expertise your team provides to Hannan Metals shareholders. Mr. Hudson, please introduce us to your board of directors and management team.
Well, I've mentioned a few of the team here before, but I see myself as a leader and spokesperson. But I have some much more capable and fantastic people around me, and I should just say that I'm a geologist, of course, and I worked and breathed geology for my career over the last 30 years, and what turns what I say my crank, what I really love doing is finding things, and that's what motivates me. And I've worked with a good group of people, the majority who I've worked with for the last 20 years in the junior business. So we're a very tight team. We're technically driven. We've been in the capital markets and made many discoveries before. In the last cycle, we took 3 discoveries to $500 million market capitalization from first principles, and really you can say this is our next one in the waiting in terms of the next discovery. So beyond myself, Lars Dahlenborg is president. Lars and I have worked together for 12 or 13 years, and Lars is a brilliant geologist and done most of the pulling together here. The other geologists on the team, and it's very important to have geologists who've made discoveries and know how to manage that capital. So some grey hair is important, and David Henstridge is a geologist I've worked with for 20 years, and he sits on the board also. Kira Talbot is a geologist also. Kira is the director of exploration for Lundin Mining, so she runs Lundin Mining's large exploration budget. So she's got an amazing experience worldwide and brings that larger company philosophy, of which most of us have worked for in our careers, but not for some time from my point of view. And then, of course, you can't just have geologists. You've got to have other people around you. And Georgina Carnegie is more from the geopolitical and side of things. So she's Harvard-trained, World Bank, OECD, came out of the Australian government, and she really has helped me in many places in the world unravel the different onion rings of power as you work your way up through a country, and she's been fantastic at articulating those messages. And then you need the engine room, of course, behind you in running these public companies. And Nick DeMere, long-term business partner, he manages all the governance and that side of the business really, and once again Mariana Bumet, who sits in Vancouver, also is our long-suffering corporate secretary who is our Jiminy Cricket and makes sure the business is run on a day-to-day basis. And so that's really the team from the board and the offices. And then I should say the hardest workers in many respects are those geologists, and we've got a long experience in Peru, and we've gone back to people for the most part that we know and know well, and they're the people and the drivers and the helpers in the field who are doing the hard yards, finding all this copper.
Mr. Hudson, I noticed that there is one name and one face that is missing on your board of directors and officers. Could you please share who that is?
Well, a very important person indeed, and that's Dr. Quinton Hennig, who came to the company relatively recently, but has known the company and the story for pretty much from the first press release we put out on this copper discovery. So Quinton is an extremely well-known geologist, probably one of the most famous geologists in North America, for his ability to think big, to pick discoveries, and then to support teams in developing them. And from a personal point of view, I've really enjoyed working with Quinton. You don't generally learn a lot in this business, in the junior business, unless you surround yourself with some super people. And Quinton is just one of those people who's taught me a lot from his vast experience base. So Quinton is an advisor to the company. We were both down in Peru relatively recently together and kicking the rocks, and his voice and experience is a tremendous advantage, and we love having him on the team.
Having Dr. Quinton Henney is a competitive advantage in and of itself.
Exactly.
All right, let's get into some numbers. Please share the capital structure of Hannan Metals.
Well, we've got 74 million shares on issue, fully diluted around about 104 million shares. The market cap varies around the 10 to 12 million at the moment. In terms of cash, we've got about $2 million Canadian cash in the bank. That will see us well and truly for this year's budget, which was targeted to be 1.7, of which we've spent some of that already. So we were going to end with about $500,000 cash after this field season. And that, of course, has been changed somewhat with this lockdown that we've seen globally as we try to avoid spreading this nasty virus, and Peru's no different. So we just have to see where things go and when it is appropriate and responsible to start our efforts again. But well and truly enough cash in the company to get through to that first drill program that we spoke about.
How much debt do you have?
Zero. If you take debt into one of these companies, it's a death spiral, and you really don't want to operate with any debt as a junior explorer, in my humble opinion.
Who are the major shareholders?
The major shareholders, well, we just did the capital raise with $2 million with the Sprott Group out of Carlsbad in California there, and so they have a large percentage on their books, and then the other large percentage is actually insiders. So between the two groups, it's something like 40% of the holdings are tied up between those two groups.
I hope our audience members are taking note here. We've got Dr. Quinton Henney and Rick Rule. Those are two names that have given the endorsement to Hannan Metals, so I would certainly take note of that. Now, there's some other high-profile names that have vetted Hannan Metals. Who are some of the high-profile names that are shareholders, sir?
Yeah, we've been very fortunate over the last 3 or 4 months to have some very high-profile people see the opportunity here. One of the first people was Mr. Bob Moriarty, who identified it and picked it as his one of his few picks for 2020. We've also got Mickey Fulp, who is a long-term shareholder, a geologist who I first met in Peru, actually, as it turns out, and he's been a long-term supporter, but he's got excited again. And then also, I think I can say this, is Brent Cook and Joe Muzumdar made a public statement that they bought it for their newsletter as well. So we're very fortunate to have some of the smartest heads outside of Quinton and Quinton Henney and Rick Rule see the opportunity here. So it's an exciting time.
Well, and include me in that as well, sir.
and of course, Proven and Probable are great supporters as well.
Are there any redundant assets on the books that we should know about?
Well, that's an interesting question. We still absolutely hold our Irish projects, but I wouldn't call them redundant in any way, shape or form. Actually, we did some fantastic work there and probably have some of the most compelling targets that have developed through lots of exploration, lots of seismic acquisition, actually, and that's what gave us the real insight to going into this data in Peru with all that petroleum data. So that has inherent value rather than redundant value. But the key point there is if we can keep those on the books with minimal spend, as we've got such an exciting project here in Peru, and there will be interest in those assets in Ireland, and we'll determine just how to monetize those for shareholders as we go forward.
Are there any change of control fees, and if yes, what is the compensation?
No, there's none.
That's quite impressive, actually. Is management charging a consultant fee for any services?
Yes, I have a fee, of course, a salary, as does Lars, but I think that you're probably hinting, do we have a separate company that charges above and beyond, which is not the case, no. So anyone can look at my salary. I take a very modest salary, something like 8,000 Canadian a month to run this company, which is, is probably one of the lower cost CEO salaries you'll find in the business. But I truly believe in putting money in the ground, and I've got a lot of equity. I've written lots of checks for this company, and I'm in it for discovery.
When was the last time you purchased shares and at what price?
I purchased shares right up and down from 25 cents down to 15, down to 5. So I've purchased all the way up and down the chain there. And in fact, myself and my business partners were, along with Rick, were the only ones writing checks last year when nobody was interested.
In closing, multi-layered question. What is the next unanswered question for Hannan Metals? When can we expect a response? And what determines success?
Well, we'll continue to put out press releases over the next 3 or 4 months. We've got rocks in the lab. We've got rocks in our field camp that need to be sent to the lab once we can get back there. And then I said we'll go back in the field when it's responsible to do so. So there'll be a continuous news flow despite the lockdowns that we see in Peru. So, and what will success be? Success will be further discoveries and confirmation of these areas over the larger area. It's very early days, as I've said, and so we need to collect a hell of a lot more data to de-risk and find a lot more of those outcropping areas, ideally, that we move towards drill targets, permitting those drill targets, and then demonstrating that continuity of grade. And I think if we can do that over the next year, where we've de-risked this project and really proven at the next level the opportunity here.
Michael, what keeps you up at night that we don't know about?
What keeps me up at night? That's a really good question. I am always what drives me is discovery. So I am always before anything else, even before the first morning coffee. Because I travel the world. I live here in Australia. I have the benefit of waking up and seeing the day's field results. So I'll always take a look there. What keeps me up is capitalising these projects or these companies appropriately. And finding the right shareholders who share the vision. I suppose it's not keeping me up at night, but it's always an ongoing challenge, of course, and making discoveries in a timely manner that fits the needs of that capital, and often that's very hard to do, of course, because everything always takes longer. So I've been managing these companies. I love it, and I suppose the only other thing that I should say is just the safety of people. I mean, we've got field teams operating in these challenging environments, and even a slip of the ankle on a slippery stone in some of these areas, in jungle areas, is tough to get out of. And not even you can helicopter people out, so they'd have to walk out. So you just want to make sure you've got people who understand how to work in these environments and do so safely. So that's also something, of course, that I think about and only know so well, having spent lots of time in those areas myself.
Mr. Hudson, last question. What did I forget to ask?
You're a very thorough questioner, Maurice. So I think we covered a lot about the project, the people, and the opportunity here. So I thank you for that. I suppose the only thing that I want to say, two things. I think there's a huge opportunity here for the mining industry to be reshaped. It's not a popular industry per se in wherever you go in the world, yet everybody relies on something for mining, and I hope there's a greater discussion between society and the mining industry itself to demonstrate that this is such an essential industry. In fact, it is an essential industry. It's one of the few industries still going here in Australia at the moment, because if we didn't produce the metals, we don't have our mobile phones, we don't have our washing machines, houses, in any sort of infrastructure. And as we decarbonise the world and go towards electrification, copper plays an extremely important aspect of that. We're going to mine more copper in the next 20 years than we have for the whole history of the Earth. So those new discoveries are really needed, and this discovery plays into that narrative perfectly. And as I mentioned there before, this has a huge opportunity for Peru to create a completely new mining district in what is already one of the world's most prolific countries from a metal endowment point of view. So I think they're just the fewer higher level thoughts that I have, but I thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, sir. Mr. Hudson, for someone listening that wants to get more information on Hannan Metals, please share the website address.
It is hannanmetals.com, simply put with the double N, HANNAN metals.com.
For direct inquiries, contact Hannan Metals at 604-699-0202, or you may email info@hannanmetals.com. Hannan Metals trades on the TSX.V symbol HAN and on the OTC HANNF. Before you make your next bullion purchase, make sure you call me. I'm a licensed representative for Miles Franklin Precious Metals Investments, where we provide a number of options to expand your precious metals portfolio, from physical delivery, offshore depositories, precious metal IRAs, and private blockchain distributed ledger technology. Call me directly at 855-505-1900, or you may email Maurice@milesfranklin.com. Finally, please subscribe to Proven and Probable.com for mining insights and bullion sales. Michael Hudson of Hannan Metals, thank you for joining us today on Proven and Probable.
The information presented on Proven and Probable is provided for educational and informational purposes only, without any express or implied warranty of any kind, including warranties of accuracy, completeness, or fitness for any particular purpose. The information is not intended to be and does not constitute financial, investment, or trading advice, or any other advice. You should not make any financial, investment, or trading decision based on any of the information presented without first undertaking independent due diligence and consultation with a professional broker or competent financial advisor.